What is your, "Sir, this is a Wendy's" moment? Story 1. I worked at a Walmart for a long time in the hardware department. Had a customer call asking if we sold toilets. I said, like toilet seats? He said no, like actual toilets. So I said, sorry, we just sell the seats and replacement parts, no porcelain. He got all huffy and said, Jesus, what is this place, a Walmart? I paused for a moment and said, yes sir, it is. Silence for a long moment, then he said in a little voice, this isn't Home Depot? No sir, you called Walmart. Oh crap, I'm so sorry. And he hung up. I laughed my ass off. Similar story, had a guy walk into my Domino's with a giant Domino's sign on the building, the Domino's logo over everything inside, and he was greeted with, welcome to Domino's. He claims he had a pizza to pick up. I ask for his name. Don't see anything in our system for him. I ask for his phone number, which is how I make sure we actually have an order for him. I don't see anything. Now, usually what happens is people order thinking they selected our location, but somehow their order goes to one of the other 2 stores in the area. So I asked if they called or ordered online. If they call, I can tell what store they ordered from based on the number. If they ordered online, they should have an email telling them what store their order went to. The guy says he ordered on the app and pulls out his phone. He opens the app and shows it to me, and I look at the app and I go, sir, that's the Pizza Hut app. You're at a Domino's right now. Apparently he always orders from us, but somehow accidentally placed his order on the Pizza Hut app. We both had a good laugh about it. He ended up leaving and getting the pizza he ordered from Pizza Hut. I did something similar once, lol. My toilet was clogged in the middle of the night, and I didn't have a plunger. Get one before you need one, people. So I googled Home Depot's hours and found out they opened at 6 or 7 or something. I drive to the Home Depot and I wait until their opening hours to come in. But when I get to the door, one of the crew members tells me they're not open. Weird. I waited for another 15 minutes and they were still not open. I was getting angry, so I called their home office and asked how come their opening hours weren't accurate. They assured me that it was, and that they were indeed open. I walked back up the building in a huff, and that's when I saw it. I kept forgetting that the Home Depot got replaced years ago by an Orchard supply store. The embarrassment on my face when I sank back into my car to drive to an actual Home Depot. Good thing I kept my composure and didn't act like an a-hole to anybody. Admittedly, I've never checked, but I am now surprised that Walmart does not sell toilets. Story 2. I was in Lowe's one morning, right after they opened. There was a woman at the service desk having a complete meltdown, yelling and screaming because Lowe's didn't have a licensed contractor there at the store for her to hire. She apparently woke up that morning and decided that she needed a deck, like that same day, and thought she could just go to Lowe's and have someone immediately start building a deck. It was dead, so I stood with the cashier listening to the show. They ended up having to call the police to get her to leave. I was buying something at Lowe's the other day, and walking past the service desk, there was a heated exchange between some lady and the employee at the service desk. Something like, ma'am, you contracted out with a third party. We don't warranty parts for a third party service. I got the gist that something went wrong with a piece of equipment that she had installed that was sold by Lowe's to a contractor. Oh, how glad I am to not be in a customer-oriented position where I work. I walked around a Home Depot for about an hour looking for filters specific to a purifier that I have. Pulled up my app, and it said to go to a certain aisle. Get there, and it's a completely different department. Check the app again and make sure I'm in the right zip code store. Go searching some more and finally ask the service desk. They look at the app, see the aisle, and take me over there. Even they were dumbfounded. Asked a second person, they pointed out I was on the Lowe's app. That's when I realized I was at Home Depot. The purifier I have is only sold at Lowe's. I meant to drive to Lowe's and took a wrong turn and just ended up at Home Depot. They're fairly close. Stores shouldn't be that similar. It's just too confusing. Story 3. I work as a facilities manager for a company with a few hundred locations around the country. Back at the end of 2020, I was having trouble getting in touch with a vendor we had a contract with to do some work around one of our offices. Nothing big. I figured he just ghosted us, so I began looking for another vendor who could take over for the work. After 2 months of radio silence, vendor 1 called me out of the blue and was clearly very drunk and crying at 1 p.m. on a weekday. Turns out he had gotten COVID-19, was hospitalized, got blood clots in both both legs and had to have them both amputated. He called me while I was at work and told me his whole life story. I ended up staying on the phone with him for about 30 to 45 minutes, and I helped him track down a grief counselor. Hopefully, he went. I still wonder how he's doing sometimes. I had a similar vendor ghosted me story. My wife and I got married in 2021, right as lockdowns were lifting, so we went for it. Had a videographer who seemed sort of out of it at our wedding. He just followed the photographers around, who did an excellent job. He didn't talk much at all and just seemed distracted. Months go by, and my wife checks up on our video progress. Turns out he was going through a rough divorce, but he was turning things around and getting to his backlog. No biggie, we give him the time and space. Then like 6 more months go by, we figure, okay, this is probably a good time to check in again. Wife goes to his Facebook page for his business, and it's just a freaking minefield of UTF happened. Turns out he murder-suicided his ex-wife in front of their kid. The wife's family was going through trying to recover any footage for couples that still had business outstanding with him. We're just, nope, that's okay. I too am a facilities manager working in a hospital for the laundry. My office phone rang one evening, and it was a confused elderly person who clearly sounded like she had dementia. I talked to that lady for well over an hour about life and everything in it. I felt bad for her because she said her daughter was supposed to be helping her get to the doctor. After all, her eyes hurt really bad from some surgery she had recently acquired. I felt so bad for her, but I could tell she was over the moon because someone was talking to her and not just hanging up on her like everyone else would do. I tried to help her get in touch with her daughter, but dementia sends you in all sorts of directions, so that ended up being a 20-minute conversation about how she met her late husband, who died of a heart attack, while sitting in his car one day outside their pharmacy. The conversation went all over the place, but she talked to me as if we had known each other our whole lives. She offered me money at some points and mentioned adding me to the will, but she couldn't remember my name and was so sorry. I cried a few times. I would have talked to her all night, but work was calling and I had to get back to it. I told her I needed to go, but if her eyes hurt that bad, I would help get an ambulance out to her to bring her into the ER. But she refused and said she could wait until her daughter finally answered and took her to her doctor's appointment. It was around 3 a.m. when this call happened, and she had been trying to get a hold of her doctor to ask how to ease her eye pain. I assumed he worked in my hospital, but once she dug out his card, I learned it was an eye doctor a few counties away. Anyway, long story short, she thanked me for taking the time to speak with her, to which I gladly obliged and thanked her for the same for taking the time to chat about life. I hung up and just saw life flashing ahead of me, how I have parents who are heading down that same road, and that the universe just gave me a heads up to prepare myself for what's coming for me in my lifetime. I will not end up like that lady's daughter who ignored her many pleas for help, as the lady had claimed. Who knows if it was true or not? Like I said, dementia is wild and takes you to all kinds of places, but there was no mistaking the gratitude in her voice, and how happy she was that I had taken the time to chat with her. I hope she's doing okay, wherever she is. Story 4. I love it when customers dump trauma on me. Okay, sir, that will be $2.15.
Yeah, my dog just died and my son was arrested. My mom's house burned down last week too.
Oh, would you like a straw? This happened to me at a call center job when I was like 17. On the first day, we get to the part of the training where we start making calls. We're supposed to do market research surveys, but most people hang up because they think it's a scam or selling something, so getting a complete, someone who actually takes the survey, was a big deal. So it's the end of the shift and I'm complete. I get to the end, and then this woman starts going on about how her father just died. No worries, training covered this at least 2 hours prior. They said to just let them talk and say, I understand, periodically. So I was doing that, and she's like, I'm so glad you understand. So many people have no idea what this is like, but when you get to a certain age, it just hits you. That was when it started to feel borderline unethical, like deceptive, voyeuristic, something along those lines. And my supervisor was hanging over me like, get off the phone so we can close this place. So I said the only thing I can think of at the moment. I was like, ma'am, I'm sorry, but I have to go. My shift is over and it's really late here, and I've got AP exams this week. She was horrified that she had used a teenager as an impromptu therapist, but I was used to that due to my own mother putting me into that role for as long as I could remember, so it didn't seem that abnormal to me at the time. I was surprised in that job by how many people were totally willing to tell very personal things to a random teen who called to ask their opinion on home equity loan or other equally riveting subjects. I got trauma dumped on me quite often driving Uber. The best one was the girl who got healed of her STD by a local megachurch. church, and I was taking her to a man's house like 30 minutes away who ordered her ride on his account. She was explaining to me how she believed this man was going to be her husband. By the time we arrived, I also learned it was her first time meeting him in person. This is my nightmare. I do not handle small talk well, let alone talking to strangers. I do fine at work and have lots of friends, but my brain just goes fight or flight dumb when a conversation goes beyond what is required in the wild. I also just don't know how to vocally be empathetic to people even if I feel it in my head. I then get annoyed that this person has decided to trauma dump me because it's not my job, nor was I prepared for it, and what if I'm having the worst day of my life? I struggle with it because I totally understand why people do it, and I feel bad for why they do it, but I just feel so trapped, and I hate it so much. It's just so manipulative, even if you do have trauma of any sort. Story 5. Uber driver. Once I had a girl I picked up from a karaoke bar that was obviously upset/distressed. Asked if she was okay. Yeah, I just did karaoke. Oh, that's pretty cool. I did a song for my dad who died a year ago. Oh, that's sweet of you. Nothing else was said until I got her home, which was only a couple of blocks away. As I pulled in, this is what she said. I'm not going to give you a bad rating for this, but you could have been more emotionally available to me. I just said, I'm sorry, and had to stop myself from bursting into laughter. I felt bad for her, of course, but that was just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard from a passenger, especially prefacing it with, I'm not going to give you a bad rating for this, but. Second story, picking up a lady, she was distressed. I asked if I could do anything for her, and she said, not unless you can take back the last 40 years of my life. It was a very silent, awkward ride. Had something similar happen to me. I worked at Home Depot years ago, and this lady came in to return like 7 doorknobs. She had a receipt, so I didn't think they were stolen. I just made an offhanded joke about how she didn't like the color anymore. This turned the convo into her telling me about how her son was supposed to change them all, but he died. I said, oh, I'm sorry, and she started telling me how she expected it, and at this point, I didn't really know how to reply, so I just said sorry again, and she started telling me about gang violence and how he was shot. I was standing there stun-locked as this lady was trauma dumping at 8:17 a.m. on a Wednesday, as there were 2 people waiting behind her with returns, and I needed her to insert her card, but didn't want to interrupt. I understand in all 3 cases, they just needed someone to be there for them, but geez, it's so awkward. I had no idea how to respond to any of that. I'm not a therapist. Like, it sucks what you're going through, but geez. I drove Uber/Lyft for a bit. I think I've got a story that kind of fits the theme. I'm in the Orlando area, so I dealt with theme park pickups/drop-offs a lot. Some places had you do it near or inside the main parking lot. Not Magic Kingdom though. You had to go to the bus loop at the Transportation and Ticket Center for those. One night, I got a hail for pickup at Magic Kingdom. I go to the T&TC as usual, and as directed by the app. After waiting a while, I called the rider. They tell me they're in the parking lot. They've got kids that are too exhausted to walk anymore. We go back and forth a bit, but he's not budging. There's no chance they're coming to where I am, which is where they're supposed to be. So I decided to try and talk my way into the parking lot and find my way to the rider. All things considered, I wasn't expecting to get myself waved in easily. It's a paid lot for one. Second, it's closing time. They're trying to get people out, not let more in. However, that turned out to be the easy part. I got let in with just a short conversation with the right person. After wandering about and finally tracking down this family of 4 in the middle of the Magic Kingdom parking lot, I get them all loaded into my car just to discover they don't need a ride. They need help finding their rental car. They'd totally forgotten how to get back to where it was, could hardly remember what it looked like, and were obviously out of range for the fob to set it off. If I remember correctly, we eventually figured out that they were on the completely wrong side of the parking lots to begin with. When I finally figured out how to get to the right section, we still probably only found the car because by that time there was next to 0 other cars left in the lot. And do you think they tipped? Not a dime. I really don't like people who do that. Story 6. I work for a CPA office that is in an office park with a couple of doctor's offices. One day a guy came in only speaking Spanish, so I grabbed my Spanish-speaking colleague to translate. He talked to the guy in the lobby for a few minutes, then the guy left and my coworker came back and asked if that was a joke or we put someone up to that. Apparently the guy explained that his testicles were extremely swollen and painful. He was looking for one of the doctor's offices and just walked into the first building in the complex. Sir, we do taxes here, not testicles. Oh, when I worked in insurance processing and took Spanish calls, this was extremely common. I remember receiving phone calls of people being pissed and yelling through their lungs in Spanish, and 90% of the time I already knew they called the wrong number. When they finally said X company and let me speak, I would reply that you called the wrong number and this is Y company. I would offer the correct number and then transfer. I loathed taking Spanish calls after so long that I begged my boss to remove me and remove my extra pay for it because they were just beyond ridiculous. I do hospital discharge planning and have had multiple incidents of walking into a patient's room, saying, "Hi, my name is Cheese. I'm a social worker and here to talk to you about your discharge plan," only for the patient to try and tell me about their vaginal bleeding or feel a lump. No, social worker. I don't do the human goo. Sometimes the emotional goo, but not the body goo. Story 7. Closing shift at a Starbucks. Was like 10 p.m. at night, and this couple came inside and walked up to me at the front counter saying, "The deli across the street is racist towards white people." I really had no response besides just standing there for a few seconds before saying, "Do you want to order something?" Ha! That just reminded me of a tangential memory of my own, where I was the customer in question. I used to routinely stop at a Starbucks that was next door to a gas station. I'd park at one or the other, then run into both, Starbucks for coffee and the gas station for a pack of cigs. I did this nearly every morning for several months. One day I got my wires crossed, or I'm not sure, but I walked into the Starbucks, waited in line, and eventually made it to the register, where I said, "Pack of Camel Lights, please." The perplexed look on the cashier's face is still burned into my memory to this day. Then I realized where I was, did a literal facepalm, and said, "Sorry, large black coffee, please." And the cashier laughed her ass off the entire time it took her to pour my coffee. I was having lunch at a small Mexican place once, and an old guy started raising his voice at the counter. He wanted a hamburger, and the girl was calmly explaining that they were a Mexican restaurant and didn't offer hamburgers. So the old guy finally hollered something like, "All I want is a hamburger, and I don't care if a goddamn Mexican cooks it." One of those goddamn Mexicans came out and told him in a barely polite and not overly friendly tone he needed to leave and find a hamburger place. I'm not gonna lie, Mexican hamburgers sound like they'd be great. Story 8. I've told this story tons of times to my friends/family because it's one of my favorite Domino's stories. This happened somewhere around 2017 or 2018. One day it was really slow at work at Domino's. I was still a relatively new insider, only a few months into what would be about 4 years, and still in school, so I was hoping that it would stay slow, so I could go home and I can cheat on my math homework, play some League of Legends, and get some sleep since my school started an hour earlier than other schools in the area. A woman, probably mid-40s, comes in to order a pizza. She's pretty chill, and we're just chatting while she's ordering because there really isn't much to do otherwise, since we already cleaned the store and oven and all that. After she gets her pizza all done up, I ask her if she'd like any drinks. She's like, "Oh, what do you guys have?" I'm running down the drink options, and she notices Coca-Cola and looks at me wide-eyed like she just saw someone get hit by a car. "Don't you know they put human embryos in Coke?" I'm sorry? She then spends the next 7 minutes running down pretty much every major conspiracy, from human embryos and Coca-Cola to flat Earth to the moon landing being faked, etc. If you think of a pre-COVID conspiracy, she hit it, and she tied it all up in a neat little bow of, "It's all the Jews." I'm stun-locked. The only words that can come out of my mouth are, "So, no on the drink? Coke Zero, please." Smiley face. I guess the zero means 0 embryos. I got out of customer service before all the crazies started showing up. The worst thing I had to deal with checking groceries was the idiots showing up 15 minutes before closing the night before Thanksgiving, saying they needed a few things, and would come up to the register 3 minutes to close with a $200 order. Or the guys coming in 10 minutes to closing on the same day who run the poultry section, then run up and yell, "Don't you people have any turkeys left?" "No, sir. We sold out 2 hours ago." "Can you check in the back?" We're completely out, including the frozen turkeys. "What kind of a supermarket doesn't have turkeys the day before Thanksgiving?" I don't know what he was thinking. People were putting in orders 2 weeks prior. I mean, I guess in a way she could be right. Coke Zero could mean 0 embryos. Story 9. I worked in a local cafe/newsstand/convenience store type spot. We also had a Ticketmaster outlet for a bit. Our small town had an annual concert that usually ran 2 or 3 nights. It was really popular with the local folks, so it brought in a lot of foot traffic, with people buying tickets. My boss was honestly a small business mastermind. That was the extent of our involvement. We sold and printed gate passes. On night one of the events, I was closing the store as usual at 10 p.m. An irate woman called wanting to file a noise complaint about the concert. I was like, "Ma'am, you must have called the wrong number. This is a local cafe." She insisted that she was filing an official noise complaint and demanded to speak to the owner right now. 10 p.m. on a Friday. Yeah, he's not here. He also isn't the police and doesn't deal with noise complaints. Also, it's only 10 p.m. and this concert has been widely advertised for months. She then went on a wild rant that we needed to something about the noise since we sold tickets. She wouldn't let me off the call and was going berserk. I told her I was going to disconnect since we had nothing to do with the event or the noise. She called back multiple times and finally I just let the phone ring. Was still ringing when we locked up. "Ma'am, are you okay?" There was a summer block party put on by some of the local businesses. Brought tons of foot traffic onto the street. One of the shop owners lost her damn mind and sent really nasty emails to the organizers and wanted the city to pull the permits last minute. She left some goofy note on her shop's door about how she was losing revenue from closing for the day. It was her decision to close, as far as I could tell. She just didn't want to have to walk as far since the street was closed. I had this lady who called me demanding that I stop calling her. I had not called her and had no idea who she was. I sort of pieced together that she was probably getting spam calls that were spoofing my number, so I tried to explain this to her and that I had no control over it. She got pissed off and screamed at me that if I wasn't going to stop, she wasn't either, then hung up. She then proceeded to call me and hang up for about 15 minutes straight, so I blocked her. Fast forward to a week later, I figured it's over, so I unblocked her. An hour later, she starts calling again, reblocked. Still have her blocked to this day. She is the crazy lady in my contacts that was nearly 10 years ago. I kind of wonder what would happen if I unblock her again. Please unblock her. Story 10. I worked in an ice cream truck, and a tweaker came up to the back. The rear doors were open and tried to buy weed from me while I was serving customers. I had to explain to him I was not selling weed. Later on, he ambushed my truck when I was leaving the park, stood in front, hit the hood a couple of times with a piece of metal, and then when I was driving off, threw said metal and shattered one of the side windows on the truck. Not sure why, but your comment triggered this. Back doors, I guess, but I worked at a restaurant in a complex with several other restaurants. Inner Harbor, Baltimore, and some guy in a white chef coat asked the kitchen manager if they could borrow 10 pounds, or 4.54 kilograms of crab meat for their restaurant. This was done a lot, but mostly with produce or low-end stuff between restaurants. He lent it and then the following week called to get them to give back the crab meat they borrowed, and no such person or can we borrow existed. Some dude just yoked the crab meat. Story 11. I worked at Wendy's throughout high school and some lady ordered a burger meal at the drive-thru. Over an hour later, she comes back to the front counter slamming the burger on it saying it was cold. I checked our receipts and told her she ordered over an hour ago and that burgers aren't meant to stay hot for that long. She said that was absolutely unacceptable and how dare we serve her a burger that gets cold. She then proceeded to ask me for my full name and details so that she could sue me, at the same time freaking out when I didn't have a pen to give her to write down my info. Another customer walking by said, "Holy crap, lady, relax," and she yells at him to mind his business. He says, "Well, I just feel bad for this poor employee you're yelling at. If you don't want to eat here, go somewhere else." Bless his soul. I was only 17 and was so shook. When I worked at a fast food restaurant, we got so many complaints about cold food that were totally ridiculous. The number of times I'd hear how they got food from our store and then drove to a town 45 minutes away, and then they were mad that the food was cold. Astounding. I saw a lady throw her cold burger at McDonald's workers once, after she had eaten 90% of it, 30 minutes before, apparently. She was screaming for them to refund her and make another one, which they did, and she was complaining because it was taking too long, and cracked it, and started throwing the burger and her fries. The worker chased her outside onto busy New York City traffic and she just ran out onto the road, and how she didn't get run over beats me. She made buses slam on their brakes, and when she saw he couldn't cross the road, she skipped over the subway entrance. Was so crazy. Craziest thing? She was wearing a security shirt. She was definitely on something. Story 12. When I was about 12 or 13, I saved up my allowance and neighborhood yard work money to finally afford the newest iPod, the one that could play videos as well. I wanted to make sure they had it at the store before I got my parents to drive me there, so I opened the phone book, found the Apple Store, and called them. Guy at the Apple Store. Hello? Me. Hi, do you have the iPod video in stock? Guy. This is an Apple Store. Like Crunch I had called the gift shop at an apple orchard. I love how the orchard guy went crunch crunch instead of saying, like, the actual fruit. I wonder if other callers had made that mistake. Story 13. I automate dumb buildings with temperature control system. Something I get a lot is that all of this equipment was working before you touched it, but now none of it works. The best ones, and my favorite ones, are when we get that call on a unit we haven't even touched. Unit 1? You're calling about Unit 1? Yeah, it was working fine before you guys touched it, and now it's not running. Okay, well, we started working on the other side of the building first, and we haven't begun tying into the units yet. So that unit is all on you. Oh. For some reason, this just reminded me of one of the most popular reasons my dad would get called into work on weekends. He was a refrigeration technician, installs and repairs for restaurants, grocers, distributors, and he would constantly get emergency calls from clients about their refrigeration not working and how he had absolutely had to go in right then, despite him trying to walk them through some simple troubleshooting steps over the phone. They would always just refuse to touch the machine if he wasn't there in person, so he'd suit up, get to the restaurant, then immediately go to the power button on the machine, switch it to on, then remind the staff to please not touch the power button after his company installs the machine. The restaurant managers were always pretty embarrassed, but for the most part my dad didn't care and was good-natured about it because it was easy overtime pay for him, and it wasn't his fault they couldn't listen to simple instruction. I can relate. I'm in controls too, and my favorite interaction just happened recently. I was walking through classrooms to verify thermostats. We do a lot of work in schools, and the second I entered this lady's class, she throws her arms up towards the ceiling and said, "Does it feel hot to you? It's hot in here. There's hot air coming out of the vents," while standing right in front of 2 open doors in the middle of summer. I look at the supply air temp at 55 degrees and just tell her I'll look into it. Nothing makes you lose all sanity faster than a bunch of heat. Story 14. I used to have a job working as a front desk third shift concierge at a swanky apartment tower. Very exclusive. NFL players, NBA players, MLB players, high-end all around. The top floor is a penthouse owned by the owner of a modeling firm. Paid like crap. One night, 2 girls came in wanting to purchase a few things from the residence dispensary, like an in-house 7-Eleven. I just get a room number and it gets tacked onto the monthly rent. While one is getting a few things, the other decides to tell me her life story and is asking me for advice on all these life-changing things she's thinking about doing. When the other one was done shopping, she came over to the counter and the 2 of them just chatted with me for a couple of hours, asking for my advice on everything. And I mean everything. I felt like a therapist for them. After a while, they wanted me to come upstairs and party with them and the friend they were visiting. I assumed they were at least a little drunk, but they had been there for a while and they weren't getting any more sober. And then the person who they were visiting, a lawyer who lived in the building, came down and was like, "Where the hell have you 2 been?" and ushered them upstairs. The next day, at the start of my shift, he was waiting for me. He apologized profusely and gave me a $200 tip and asked me not to mention the 2 girls to anyone. Apparently, they were a pair of escorts and were high as a kite on ecstasy. I would have said, an extra $50, and if the cops ask, you're my lawyer. Story 15. I had a car for sale and an influencer called me up and said they would like to use my car for a podcast. They said, "You need to have your car at," and I cut them off and said, "I'm sorry, did you just tell me that I need to deliver a car that you're asking to borrow for no?" They said, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, okay, just send me a retainer of 1/4 the price of the car and you can borrow it. I don't know you." She said, "I don't have that much money." I said, "Well, I do, so who the hell in their right mind tells the person they are asking for a favor where to be and what to do?" She got really angry and explained to me who she was, then told me I can destroy your business in minutes with a negative comment. I couldn't stop laughing. I'm an architect and normally work for corporations. She said the people do as I demand, and I have 90,000 followers. I said, "Cool, have every single one of your followers send you money so that you can borrow my car," and then hung up. I got 4 emails from her loyal followers. 4. I wish they had told us the name of the podcast. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and don't forget to subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again and see you next time.